The Pacific wind no longer whispers through the carefully manicured gardens. The koi pond, once rippling with life beneath the reflection of California sunlight, is now a stagnant mirror. At the edge of the bluffs in Malibu, perched like a forgotten shrine, stands the house that once belonged to Johnny Carson. It doesn't speak, it doesn't move, but it remembers. From the salt-stained windows of his estate, Carson once watched the ocean in quiet solitude, far removed from the laughter he delivered into America's living rooms every night. This was the kingdom he built, not on applause, but silence, the ultimate sanctuary for the most private public figure in Hollywood history. But like all sanctuaries built by mortal hands, this one could not hold back time. Now, the gates are locked, the gardens overgrown. The home, once worth tens of millions, is a ghost of its former self. How could the king of late night, who reigned with effortless charm for 3 decades, leave behind something that feels so hollow? This is not just the story of a house. It's the story of a man who made the world laugh while privately battling shadows, a story of power, isolation, legacy, and what becomes of the spaces we leave behind. Johnny Carson's estate wasn't just abandoned in structure, it was abandoned in spirit. And that abandonment, like all great Hollywood tragedies, didn't happen all at once. It began slowly, quietly, the way fame fades, the way a final curtain falls. Johnny Carson at home, fame, fortune, and the fortress on the hill. At the height of his power, Johnny Carson commanded a kind of reverence few celebrities could dream of. From behind the desk of The Tonight Show, he wasn't just a talk show host, he was America's confidant. Presidents waited for his approval. Movie stars feared his silence more than his jokes, but behind that effortless cool, behind the sharp one-liners and impeccable timing, was a man desperate for escape. He didn't like crowds, he didn't like parties, and he loathed being misunderstood. So, in 1984, after 2 decades of public adoration and a series of increasingly uncomfortable spotlights, Carson retreated. Not off the air, but off the grid. He purchased a cliffside plot in Malibu's Point Dume, a place so private it felt closer to the edge of the world than to Los Angeles. He commissioned architect Ed Niles, known for his dramatic, angular glass and steel creations. What they built together wasn't just a home. It was a fortress of solitude, an architectural paradox, bold in appearance, hidden in intention, a sprawling 4-acre estate with floor-to-ceiling windows that welcomed in the ocean but kept the world at arm's length. A koi pond to soothe the mind, a saltwater pool to float away the noise, skylights, arboretums, a championship tennis court, every inch designed not for guests, but for reflection. Here, Carson played tennis every morning, often alone. He read voraciously. He smoked with abandon. He spoke little. Friends who visited described him as gracious but distant, always courteous, never intimate. The estate became a reflection of its owner, beautiful, composed, but ultimately impenetrable. In public, Carson remained the king of comedy. But at home, there was no laughter track, no audience, just the steady rhythm of the tides and the rare intrusion of a helicopter overhead, curious paparazzi trying to pierce the veil. His marriages had come and gone. He was on his 4th to Alexis Maas, a much younger woman who preferred the quiet life too. Together, they lived in near isolation. No lavish parties, no Hollywood dinners, just silence. But silence is never neutral. It can heal, or it can haunt. And in Carson's case, it did both. The final curtain, retirement, illness, and a quiet goodbye. By the early 1990s, Johnny Carson had become a ghost in waiting. Still vital on screen, but increasingly withdrawn off it, he began to look toward an exit. One not just from television, but from the machine of fame itself. In 1992, at age 66, Carson shocked the world by retiring at the peak of his power. No scandal, no network war, just enough. America mourned, viewers wept, presidents sent tributes, but Carson didn't flinch. He walked away with the same cool grace he brought to the stage, then disappeared into the Pacific haze of Malibu, never to return to late night again. In his final years, Carson lived the way he'd always wanted, hidden. Few photographs exist of him post-retirement. He avoided interviews. He wrote monologue jokes for David Letterman anonymously, but never reappeared on television. The Point Dume estate, now surrounded by security and thick hedges, became his whole world. But time, like the tide, doesn't wait. By the early 2000s, Carson's health began to decline. Years of heavy smoking had taken their toll. In 2002, he was diagnosed with emphysema, a cruel irony for a man whose voice had once captivated millions. The breath that carried his wit, his warmth, was slowly, mercilessly fading. He didn't fight publicly. There was no press release, no carefully orchestrated goodbye, just further silence. Friends who called were often turned away. Even those close to him sometimes didn't know how sick he truly was. That was Carson, always the editor of his own story. On January 23, 2005, Johnny Carson died at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. He was 79. The official cause was respiratory failure due to emphysema. Hollywood paused. A nation mourned. But Carson's estate remained quiet, still, untouchable. There would be no televised funeral, no Walk of Fame ceremony. Just a will, a widow, and a question. What now? The man who'd once lit up millions of screens had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a fortress of glass and steel on a Malibu cliff, and the eerie silence of an empty home that once held a legend. The estate. After Carson, legacy, ownership, and echoes. After Carson's death, the Malibu estate passed into the hands of his widow, Alexis Mayas. She was the last to live there, briefly, quietly, before the house too slipped into a kind of retirement. It was no longer a home. It was a relic, a sealed vault of a man who had spent his life keeping the world at bay. By 2007, just 2 years after Johnny's death, Moss sold the estate to film producer and businessman Sidney Kimmel. The sale was quiet, tucked away from the tabloids, though the number, around $46 million, whispered through real estate circles like a ghost story. Carson's fortress had changed hands, but not spirit. Kimmel, too, was private. He rarely used the home, and in time, it began to show. The glass panels fogged over with ocean air. The gardens that once wrapped Carson in green solitude began to fray at the edges. The koi pond, once a daily ritual for the late-night king, became a stagnant echo of its former self. Rooms stood untouched. Tennis balls sat in corners, gathering dust. By 2017, Kimmel tried to sell the estate for a staggering $81.5 million, capitalizing on the Carson mystique and the allure of Malibu's bluffs. But the listing lingered. Despite the property's pedigree and architectural brilliance, buyers were hesitant. Some said it felt too cold, too distant, too haunted by its past. The price dropped from $81 million to $65 million to $49 million until, finally, in 2019, it sold again, this time for around $40 million, less than half its peak valuation. The new buyer, kept mostly anonymous, has done little publicly with the property. No parties, no press, no renovations reported. Just silence, and so Carson's once glittering home sits mostly empty. Not quite abandoned, but untouched. Like a showroom for a life that no longer exists. Neighbors say the lights rarely come on. The tennis court hasn't seen a match in years. And if you stand close enough on a foggy day, they say you can almost hear the ocean wind carrying something more. A whisper of monologue, a soft laugh, a chair swiveling one last time. The house has changed owners, but it has never truly let Johnny Carson go. Myth versus reality, the ghost mansion narrative. The story of Johnny Carson's estate, like the man himself, has become wrapped in myth. YouTube videos proclaim it abandoned. Urban explorers spin tales of decay and dust, of rooms left exactly as they were when Carson died. Cigarette in the ashtray, robe on the chair, laughter lingering in the walls. It's a seductive image, a ghost house for a ghost of a man. But is it true? The answer, like Carson's smile, is more nuanced than it appears. Yes, the estate is largely unoccupied. No, it's not in ruins. While it's passed through hands and seen its luster dimmed, reports of full abandonment are exaggerated. The windows may fog, the garden may overgrow, but the bones of the house remain intact. Real estate records show private maintenance, occasional listings, even high-end staging for potential buyers. This is not a house forgotten by time, but rather one preserved in stasis, waiting for a new story. What fuels the myth is the emotional weight of the property, because it feels abandoned. Carson's presence was so dominant, so central to the identity of the house, that any occupant who followed, no matter how wealthy or discreet, felt like an imposter. It's not just about who lives there, it's about who doesn't. The house remains steeped in absence. The koi pond doesn't just lack fish, it lacks Carson. The tennis court doesn't just lack play, it lacks the man who once broke a sweat there every morning, chasing stillness and motion. Each inch of glass reflects not the Pacific, but memory. And so the myth persists, not because the estate is physically ruined, but because it's emotionally vacant. It's a mansion with a missing heartbeat, a fortress that protected a man who no longer exists, and now protects nothing at all. To stand at the edge of that property today is to witness a rare Hollywood phenomenon, a house that still belongs to a legend, even in his eternal absence. Symbolism and tragic decline. When a fortress becomes a mausoleum. Johnny Carson didn't die in poverty. He didn't die forgotten. He didn't die disgraced. But he did die alone. And his home, the steel and glass sanctuary he built to guard that solitude, outlived him in a way that feels almost cruel. Because what happens to a fortress once its king is gone? The answer, in Carson's case, is tragic, not in scandal, but in symbolism. The estate's decline mirrors the arc of Carson's own life. His career was a long crescendo of applause, laughter, and lights. But at its peak, he turned away from it all. The fame that once elevated him became a burden. The privacy he craved became isolation. And the estate he built as a refuge became, over time, a mausoleum. He didn't throw wild parties. He didn't host glittering galas. He didn't even let many people in. That home was never designed to carry legacy. It was designed to hide from it. That choice, while understandable, meant that the estate lacked roots. There were no children racing through its halls, no famous dinner conversations to echo into history. Just Carson, one man, one view, one life, folded up and tucked away like a closing monologue. The tragedy isn't in dust or disrepair, it's in the quiet. Because a house like that, it should be alive. It should pulse with music, laughter, memories, but instead, it stands frozen, famous for being forgotten. And in that frozen stillness lies the deeper loss. Not just the man, but the meaning he could have passed down. The home should have been a museum, a creative retreat, a tribute to the art of performance. Instead, it is a monument to retreat itself. It's as if Carson's greatest act wasn't on stage, but off it, the disappearing act. And the house, his final, lingering illusion. Still standing, still beautiful, but empty, like applause fading into the night. The current state and what could be, a legacy in limbo. Today, Johnny Carson's estate sits in an uneasy limbo, too valuable to ignore, too haunted to embrace. The current owner remains elusive, as if continuing Carson's tradition of distance. No major renovations have been publicized. No interior redesigns made headlines. Occasionally, whispers in luxury real estate circles surface, speculation, listings, price cuts, but no new narrative ever truly takes hold. The property is no longer a home, it's an object of speculation, an opulent chess piece in a market that values price over poetry. But even at $40 million, the house struggles to find someone who sees it as more than square footage. That's the curse of legacy estates. They carry ghosts. Could the estate be restored? Repurposed? Certainly. There's nothing structurally stopping it from becoming a creative retreat, a private art institute, or even a tribute to Carson himself. But the will to do so would require vision and reverence, not just for design, but for the man who walked those halls in quiet contemplation. Some have floated the idea of converting it into a museum of television history. Others envision it as a writer's haven, a sanctuary for introspection. But the money, the zoning, the emotional complexity of such a place, they keep it stuck in purgatory, and in that stasis, its story lingers like smoke after the final cigarette. Johnny Carson gave over $150 million to his charitable foundation before his death, a staggering act of generosity that continues to impact education, arts, and health programs today. His legacy lives on through laughter, through reruns, through the stars he launched, but his home, the place that held his final chapters, remains adrift, neither preserved nor erased, neither cherished nor condemned. It is not rare for celebrity estates to decay after death, but it is rare for one to feel so pointedly symbolic, so intertwined with the psyche of its owner. That is what makes Carson's estate different. It isn't just a neglected mansion. It's a message, one that whispers from its quiet bluffs, asking not to be remembered, but to be understood. The house that told the truth. And now we arrive at the haunting core of it all, the culmination of wealth, fame, isolation, and legacy, all entombed in a structure that never truly felt like a home. The biggest reveal? Johnny Carson never meant for that estate to survive him, not in any meaningful way. It wasn't a beacon of legacy. It wasn't built for future generations, and it certainly wasn't meant to be visited. Unlike the estates of stars who embrace immortality, like Graceland or Hearst Castle, Carson's Malibu retreat was designed to vanish into the horizon just as he did. And in that intent lies the shocking truth. The estate's abandonment isn't a failure. It's fulfillment. It's exactly what Carson wanted. A disappearance. He gave America his face, his wit, his hours, his years. But the man behind the desk, he never wanted to be fully known. And when he left, he made sure that the physical manifestation of his inner life would follow him into silence. That's why the price dropped. That's why no one quite fits inside those walls. That's why every real estate agent can show it, but no one can sell it. Because this wasn't just a house. It was a projection, a disguise, a hiding place for a man who mastered the art of being seen without ever being known. The reveals come not from scandal, but from subtlety. The unused guest house, the untouched arboretum, the photos of the tennis court still lined but unused. The way the house never hosted stories. It merely absorbed them in silence. It is not rot that haunts Carson's estate. It is reverence. Everyone who walks its halls feels like they're intruding on something sacred. Even in disrepair, the estate holds power. Not the kind that dazzles, but the kind that unsettles. The kind that makes you ask, what was this man really running from? And perhaps that's the final trick Johnny Carson played. The greatest monologue he never delivered. He left behind a mansion not filled with laughter, but with questions. Not stories, but echoes. And in doing so, he ensured that we would talk about him not just as a performer, but as a mystery. A house that breathes in silence. It's a strange kind of poetry, the way Johnny Carson's estate continues to stand, perched on the edge of California's cliffs, both defiant and forgotten. A home that once held one of the most familiar faces in American history, now quietly fading into the salt air and sky. There's no grand plaque on the gates, no crowds of fans lighting candles, no curated legacy for visitors to digest. And maybe that's the most honest tribute of all. Because Johnny Carson wasn't built for museums. He wasn't made for monuments. He was made for the moment, the beat between a setup and a punchline, the perfect pause before a laugh. He belonged to the airwaves, not the architecture. But still, that house remains. Not ruined, not alive, just there, as if waiting for someone to ask the right question, as if daring someone to step inside and understand what it really means to disappear with dignity. In the end, what Johnny Carson left behind wasn't a crumbling estate. He left behind silence, his final, most personal punchline. A kind of disappearance most celebrities only dream of. No drama, no spectacle, just absence. And in that absence, the estate whispers a truth few in Hollywood dare to face. Fame fades. Applause ends. And even the most breathtaking ocean view can become a window into loneliness. But if you stand at the edge of that bluff, and the wind is right, you might just hear it. The faintest echo of laughter. Not from a stage, not from a crowd, but from the memory of a man who once made the whole world smile, and then quietly, deliberately, walked off into the night. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment down below as it helps support this channel. Also, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our newest videos. Thanks for watching.